In 1484, María González screams echo through a stone chamber in Toledo as the rope tears into her wrists, lifting her broken body toward the ceiling. But that's not even the worst part. What happened next would expose the most twisted conspiracy in European history, one that specifically targeted women with a cruelty that makes your blood run cold. By the end of this video, you'll understand why historians tried to bury this story for centuries and why 8 out of every 10 victims were women. I'm going to reveal 3 shocking truths that will change how you see religious persecution forever. First, the perverted psychological reason women were targeted 8 times more than men, and it has nothing to do with religion. Second, the most horrific torture method ever documented, designed specifically to break women's bodies and minds in under 30 minutes. And third, how one woman's forbidden testimony exposed the entire conspiracy and revealed the real motive behind 350 years of systematic murder. Subscribe now because this gets darker than anything you've seen before. And if you think you know the Spanish Inquisition, you're about to discover that everything you learned was a carefully constructed lie. But before we dive into the nightmare, you need to understand how this machine of terror was built. Picture Spain in 1478. The Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella have just established what they call a holy office, the Spanish Inquisition. On the surface, it's about religious purity, rooting out fake converts from Judaism and Islam, the official story, protecting the faith. But here's what nobody tells you: this wasn't just religious persecution. This was the first systematic, government-sponsored campaign of gender-based violence in European history. For 356 years, this machine would consume over 125,000 victims, and the numbers reveal a terrifying pattern. While men made up roughly half the population, they represented only 20% of Inquisition victims. Women, especially widows, property owners, and those who dared to practice medicine or herbalism, were hunted like animals. The Inquisition kept meticulous records, and those records tell a story the Church desperately wanted hidden. You see, this wasn't random. Every torture method, every accusation, every confession was part of a calculated system designed to break women specifically. They studied female psychology, female anatomy, female social roles, and weaponized every weakness they could find. But the official records hide the real story. Hidden in archives across Spain, Mexico, and Peru are thousands of testimonies that reveal the true horror. Documents that show how inquisitors discussed the best ways to torture pregnant women. Manuals that detail exactly how many turns of the rope would dislocate a woman's shoulders without killing her too quickly. What you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a blueprint for oppression that echoes through every genocide, every systematic persecution that followed. And it all started with a twisted theory about why women were more dangerous than men. Imagine you're a woman in 1480s Spain. You've just lost your husband, and suddenly you own property, make your own decisions, maybe even practice herbal medicine to support your family. You think you're building a life, but to the Inquisition, you've just painted a target on your back. Here's the twisted logic that would destroy millions of lives. The Church taught that women were weaker vessels, physically, mentally, and spiritually inferior to men. But here's the sick paradox: this supposed weakness made them more dangerous, not less. The reasoning: if women were weaker, they were easier targets for Satan. If they were more emotional, they were more likely to make pacts with demons. If they were more social, they could spread heretical ideas faster. Every female trait became evidence of potential evil. But here's what nobody tells you: this wasn't original Spanish thinking. It came directly from a book that would become the Inquisitors' Bible, the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches. Written in 1487, this manual didn't just describe how to identify witches. It provided detailed instructions on why women were inherently more susceptible to demonic influence. Listen to this actual quote: "All witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable." The book literally argued that women's sexuality made them natural allies of Satan, independent women, obviously witches, widows who inherited property, definitely in league with demons, women who knew about herbs and healing, clearly practicing dark magic. The Inquisition took this theory and weaponized it into systematic law. They created specific categories of suspicion that applied almost exclusively to women. A woman who lived alone was suspicious. A woman who was too beautiful was using supernatural means. A woman who was too ugly was obviously cursed. A woman who was too successful in business must have made a demonic pact. You literally could not win. But here's where it gets even more sinister. The inquisitors discovered that women responded differently to torture than men, not physically, but psychologically. Women were more likely to confess to protect their children, more likely to implicate others to end their own suffering, more likely to break under specific types of psychological pressure. So they designed their entire system around exploiting these differences. But this was just the beginning of their twisted logic. Don't click away yet, because what I'm about to show you reveals how the Inquisition turned torture into a science specifically designed to break women's bodies and minds with surgical precision. Meet Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor and architect of systematic terror. In 1484, he issued secret instructions to inquisitors across Spain, a manual that wouldn't be discovered by historians until the 1960s. This document reveals something chilling. They had studied women's anatomy and psychology to create torture methods that would be most effective against female victims. The most infamous was la garrocha, the pulley torture. But here's what your history textbook didn't tell you. It was specifically calibrated for women's lighter body weight and different joint structure. Picture this: you're stripped naked and tied with a rope that cuts into your wrists. Your arms are yanked behind your back and you're hoisted toward the ceiling. But here's the sick genius: they didn't just lift you. They added weights to your feet, but the weights were calculated based on female bone density and muscle mass. For men, they used 50-pound weights. For women, they discovered that 25 pounds created the same psychological impact while ensuring you survived long enough for multiple sessions. They had literally done the math on female suffering, but that's nothing compared to what they called the improved garrocha. They would lift you up, then suddenly drop you, but stop the fall just before your shoulders completely dislocated. The sudden jerk created a sound that one inquisitor described as the music of confession. Here's a direct quote from Torquemada's manual: "Women of childbearing age require special consideration in the application of the garrocha, as their maternal instincts can be exploited to increase psychological pressure." They literally weaponized motherhood, but the physical torture was only the beginning. They discovered that women were more susceptible to sexual humiliation, so nudity became mandatory, more affected by threats to their children, so family members were brought to watch, more likely to confess to protect others, so they tortured victims in front of each other. The records show they kept detailed notes on which methods worked best on which types of women. Widows responded to one approach, mothers to another, young unmarried women to a third. They had literally created a taxonomy of female suffering. One method was so brutal, even hardened inquisitors refused to use it. But before I reveal that nightmare, you need to understand how they perfected the art of breaking minds. I know this is getting dark, but if you're still watching, you're clearly as fascinated by history's brutal truths as I am. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week, I'm revealing how the Catholic Church used these same techniques during the colonial inquisitions in Mexico and Peru. Now, imagine you're María González in 1491. You've survived the garrocha. Your shoulders are dislocated, but you haven't confessed. The inquisitors are frustrated, but they have one more weapon in their arsenal, something they called toca, or water torture. But here's what nobody tells you about the toca: it wasn't just water torture. It was a precisely calibrated psychological assault designed around women's specific fears and physical responses. You're strapped to an angled table, head lower than your feet. A cloth covers your face, and they begin pouring water over your mouth and nose. But the genius, if you can call it that, lies in the details they perfected specifically for women. They discovered that women had a stronger gag reflex, so they used a different pouring technique. Women were more claustrophobic, so they adjusted the cloth positioning. Women were more likely to panic about their appearance being destroyed, so they made sure the victim could see her reflection in the water basin. The Inquisition records show that men typically lasted 45 minutes to an hour before confessing. Women, the average was 28 minutes. But here's the truly sick part: they didn't want quick confessions. They wanted detailed confessions that implicated other women, so they developed what they called interrupted toka. They would bring you to the edge of drowning, then stop, let you recover just enough to speak, then start again. Each cycle was designed to extract specific information, names, locations, details about supposed witchcraft practices. María González lasted 6 hours of interrupted toka before she broke, but when she finally spoke, her words would change everything. Because María didn't just confess to witchcraft, she exposed something the inquisitors never expected anyone to figure out. Hidden in the Cuenca archives is her full testimony, recorded by a court scribe who was so shocked by what he heard that he made a secret copy. For 500 years, this document remained buried. When historians finally found it in 1987, it revealed the truth that would make you question everything you thought you knew about religious persecution. Her words would expose the darkest secret of all, and it had nothing to do with religion. Wait until you hear what María González revealed, because this single testimony exposes why historians tried to bury this story for centuries. After 6 hours of torture, María didn't just confess to witchcraft. She did something unprecedented. She started talking about money. Specifically, she began listing every piece of property, every business deal, every inheritance that had been confiscated from women in her village. The court scribe, expecting to record demonic rituals and Sabbath meetings, instead found himself writing down a detailed economic analysis. María had connected the dots that the Inquisition never wanted anyone to connect. Every woman accused of witchcraft was also a woman who owned something valuable. Here's the shocking truth that took historians centuries to piece together. In 15th century Spain, women controlled approximately 40% of all private wealth. Widows inherited their husbands' property. Unmarried women inherited from their fathers. Women ran businesses, owned land, controlled trade routes. But under Spanish law, when someone was convicted of heresy, all their property was automatically forfeited to the crown and the church. Every single asset, every piece of land, every business gone, split between the monarchy and the Inquisition itself. The math is staggering. Over 356 years, the Spanish Inquisition conducted approximately 125,000 trials. Of those, 80% targeted women, and of those women, 90% owned significant property before their arrest, the total wealth confiscated. Modern economists estimate it at roughly 400 million ducats, equivalent to about $50 billion today. But here's the most damning evidence. The Inquisition kept detailed financial records alongside their torture records. These documents, hidden in archives across Spain, show a direct correlation between a woman's wealth and her likelihood of being accused. The richer you were, the more likely you were to be denounced as a witch. They had literally created a system to legally steal women's wealth under the guise of religious purity. María González wasn't just tortured because she was a woman, she was tortured because she owned 3 houses, 2 businesses, and had recently inherited her late husband's trade connections. Her confession wasn't about demons and spells, it was a detailed inventory of assets that the church was already counting on acquiring. The system was so successful that it spread across the Spanish Empire. Mexico, Peru, the Philippines, everywhere Spanish colonizers went, the Inquisition followed, and everywhere it went, women's property mysteriously disappeared into church coffers. But the truth has a way of emerging. By the early 1800s, too many people knew the real score. Spanish intellectuals began publishing exposes. Other European nations started mocking Spain's holy theft. The economic benefits could no longer justify the international embarrassment. The Spanish Inquisition officially ended in 1834, not because the church suddenly developed a conscience, but because the con game had finally been exposed. The last Grand Inquisitor didn't go out preaching about religious purity, he went out defending the church's right to the property it had stolen. 350 years, 125,000 victims. $50 billion in stolen wealth, and it almost worked. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't just a historical nightmare, it was a blueprint. Every systematic persecution that followed, from the Salem witch trials to modern genocides, used elements of this playbook. Target a vulnerable group, create legal justification, exploit their specific weaknesses, and profit from their destruction. Today we see echoes of these tactics in gender-based persecution worldwide. The methods change, but the pattern remains. Identify, isolate, eliminate, and profit. But here's what gives me hope: stories like María González's survive. Truth has a way of surfacing, even after centuries of burial. Every time we uncover these hidden histories, we make it harder for the same patterns to repeat. So here's my question for you: what other religious movements were really about power and money? What other historical narratives need to be questioned and examined? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video opened your eyes to history's hidden truths, hit that notification bell, because next week I'm exposing how these same tactics were used in colonial America. Trust me, you won't believe what they tried to hide about Salem. The truth is always darker than the official story.